My name is Ava Mercer. I turned 30 last Thursday, and at my birthday dinner, my mother smiled across a candlelit table, lifted her wine glass, and said, "I think it's time for the truth. We only adopted you for the tax break." My sister laughed before anyone else did. My father didn't laugh at all. He just looked down at his plate, like he had known this moment was coming and had decided silence would cost him less than honesty. For one long second, the whole room held still. Then my mother added, with the kind of casual cruelty that only comes from years of practice, "You were never really one of us." I stood up, reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a thick cream envelope and said, "Funny. I brought the truth, too." The dinner was at the house I grew up in. White brick colonial in Brentwood, green shutters, 2 dogwoods out front, a curved driveway my father treated like a personal achievement. From the street, it looked like every polished upper-middle-class Southern home trying to whisper old money without saying it out loud. Inside, everything had always been precise. Coasters under every glass, candles lit even when no guests were coming, family portraits, positioned to tell a version of our life that looked better than the real one. My sister Caroline was in nearly every frame at the center, smiling wide. I was usually somewhere off to the side, if I appeared at all. That should have told me everything years ago. Caroline was 28, blonde, glossy, photogenic in the way some people are before they even open their mouths. She worked in luxury event marketing, wore white linen to casual dinners, and had spent most of her 20s collecting things other people paid for: trips, jewelry, professional opportunities arranged quietly through my father's contacts. She was not cruel in the dramatic way movies like to show. She was worse. She was amused. She treated other people's pain like a detail in a story she'd never have to carry. Growing up beside her taught me that favoritism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles. My father, Thomas Mercer, was a real estate attorney who believed authority was its own form of affection. If he paid the mortgage, in his mind, he had fulfilled every emotional obligation worth measuring. My mother, Elaine, specialized in a softer kind of damage. She never had to raise her voice. She could reduce a person with a glance, a pause, a sigh in the right place. She wasn't dramatic either. She was strategic. And that combination had shaped the house more than the architecture ever did. I came into that family when I was 8 years old. That was the official version, the sanitized one. We adopted Ava when she needed a home. That sentence appeared so often in school paperwork and church introductions that it became a family slogan. What no one said out loud was that I wasn't a stranger. I was my father's niece. His younger brother, Daniel, had died in a boating accident when I was 7. My mother, my biological mother, had died 4 years earlier from a stroke, brought on by an undiagnosed clotting disorder. After my father's brother died, there was no one left on that side willing or able to take me in except Thomas. He and Elaine became my legal guardians first, then adopted me less than a year later. Publicly, everyone praised their generosity. Privately, I learned very quickly that gratitude was expected to replace belonging. There are children who grow up knowing they are loved. There are others who grow up knowing they are loved. Tolerated children become very observant adults. I noticed early that things in that house were measured differently for me. Caroline's mistakes were phases. Mine were character flaws. Caroline got piano lessons because she showed promise. I got grocery lists because I needed structure. On her 16th birthday, she got a silver BMW with a white bow on the hood. On mine, I got a used laptop and a reminder that some girls should be grateful for the basics. When she failed a college statistics class, my father called the professor unreasonable. When I got into Vanderbilt on scholarship, my mother told people it was a nice, practical option, as if she were complimenting a sensible pair of shoes. The only person in that family who ever saw the imbalance clearly was my grandmother, Helen Mercer, my father's mother. Sharp gray eyes, no patience for posturing. She lived 10 minutes away in a smaller, older house until her arthritis worsened and she moved in with us for the last 3 years of her life. She watched everything. Who interrupted me? Who forgot my birthday until the evening? Who spoke over me at dinner and called it teasing? She never confronted my parents directly in front of me, but I heard enough through half-closed doors and low voices and hallways to know she was not blind. The first time she said it plainly, I was 16. We were shelling peas in the kitchen while my mother and sister were upstairs getting ready for some charity dinner. Grandmother kept her eyes on the bowl and said, "You need to understand something. Ava, people can do the legally right thing and still fail. Morally." I looked at her, not fully understanding. She added, "When someone makes you feel like a guest in your own life, don't learn the wrong lesson from it." At 16, I thought she was just being kind. At 30, I understood she had been warning me. By 22, I had moved into the detached guest suite over the garage to create some distance while finishing my accounting degree, working full-time for a small forensic bookkeeping firm in Nashville. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was clean work. Patterns, ledgers, discrepancies, paper trails. Numbers told the truth more reliably than people did. My mother called it dreary, and my sister used to joke that I made a living ruining men's afternoons. The truth was, I was good at it. Quietly good. The kind of good that makes people underestimate you right up until they realize you've already read the whole file. 3 years before my 30th birthday, grandmother died. Peacefully. In her sleep. No drama. No reconciliations. Just absence. The house felt colder after that. My mother redecorated her room within 2 months. My father called it practical. I called it fast. A week after the funeral, an attorney named Martin Weiss contacted me and told me my grandmother had left me a sealed envelope with specific instructions. Do not open until your 30th birthday. That was all he said. I almost asked more questions, but something in his tone stopped me. So I waited. I kept the envelope in my apartment safe for 3 years. On the morning of my 30th birthday, I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter from my grandmother, a certified copy of a trust amendment, and a property deed. I read the letter first. Ava, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you are 30. I chose that age because by now, I hope you know who you are well enough not to let anyone else define it for you. There are truths this family has hidden behind manners and polished silverware for too long. One of them is about why you were adopted. The other is about this house. If Thomas and Elaine have not told you the first truth by now, they eventually will, and not out of courage. They will do it when they believe honesty can still serve them. So here is mine. Years ago, after Daniel died, I overheard Elaine speaking to an accountant about adoption credits, dependency exemptions, and survivor benefit structuring. I wanted to believe I misunderstood. I did not. They took you in because you needed a home, yes. But they finalized the adoption sooner and more aggressively because there were financial incentives attached to making you legally theirs. I confronted Thomas. He insisted that practical motives did not erase duty. Perhaps not, but they do stain it. The second truth is simpler. This house has never belonged to them. I stopped reading and looked at the deed. The property, the one my parents had lived in for 26 years, the one my father referred to as the family home, the one my sister liked to call our inheritance, was held in a residential trust established by my grandmother 15 years earlier. Title had never passed to my parents. My father had paid maintenance, taxes, and renovation costs, but legal ownership remained in the trust. And under the amendment dated 6 months before her death, sole ownership transferred to me on my 30th birthday. Not future ownership, not partial interest, mine. I read the letter again from the beginning. I leave this to you not as revenge, but as correction. A home should belong to the person who understands what one costs. You do not owe cruelty for cruelty, but you do owe yourself clarity. Grandmother. I sat at my kitchen table for almost an hour after reading that. Then I called Martin Weiss. He confirmed everything. The deed had already been recorded that morning, exactly as instructed. The transfer was clean, enforceable, and long prepared. Your grandmother was very precise, he said dryly. I'm beginning to understand that, I replied. He also told me something else. There had been one more note in the file. Short, typed. If they tell her the truth before she tells them, she'll know exactly what to do. That was Thursday morning. Thursday evening, my mother invited me to a special birthday dinner. Her voice was unusually sweet. Caroline would be there, my father too. Just family, she said. I almost declined. Then I looked at the deed again and said yes. The dining room glowed in the usual way that evening, candles, water, glasses catching warm light. My mother had made braised short ribs because they were my father's favorite, and she preferred menus that reminded people whose house they were supposedly in. Caroline wore a cream dress and gold earrings, large enough to announce confidence from across the room. My father had opened a bottle of wine he normally reserved for clients. Everything about the table felt rehearsed. At first, dinner moved through the usual performance. Caroline described a brand retreat in Aspen. My mother asked whether I was still buried in numbers. My father gave a long answer to a question no one had asked about market conditions in Williamson County. I stayed quiet and watched. Then dessert arrived. A small chocolate cake. 30 candles would have been absurd, so my mother had arranged 3 large sparklers instead. Caroline clapped lightly. My father raised his glass. That's 30, he said. A milestone. My mother smiled at me, not warmly, intentionally. Yes, she said, and milestones are for honesty. Something in Caroline's expression told me she knew what was coming. I set down my fork. My mother folded her hands. You're 30 now, Ava. Old enough for the truth. We only adopted you for the tax break. Caroline gave a short laugh before covering it with her napkin. My father looked at his plate. I said nothing. My mother mistook my silence for shock and kept going. Your father felt responsible after Daniel died, of course. But there were benefits involved. Financial ones. It made the timing make sense. She tilted her head slightly. You were cared for. You had opportunities. But let's not pretend this was some fairy tale rescue built on sentiment. Caroline leaned back in her chair. Mom, she said, smiling into her wine. That sounds terrible. It's the truth, my mother said. Then she looked at me and delivered the part she had saved for impact. You were never really one of us. No one moved. No one defended me. I felt the envelope in my coat pocket pressing lightly against my side. I stood. My chair scraped softly against the hardwood floor. My mother blinked once, surprised less by my movement than by the fact that I didn't look broken. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cream envelope. Funny, I said. I brought the truth, too. Caroline's smile faltered. My father looked up. I opened the envelope carefully, removed the deed and trust documents, and placed them on the table between the wine glasses and dessert plates like I was setting down one more course. My father frowned. What is this? A recorded property transfer, I said, and a trust amendment from grandmother. My mother's expression changed first, not confusion. Recognition. She knew the name Martin Weiss. My father reached for the papers. He read quickly at first, then again more slowly. Caroline leaned toward him. Dad? He didn't answer. He turned the page. Read the transfer date. Read the beneficiary line. Read my name. His face lost color with surprising speed. My mother stood up so abruptly, her chair legs caught the rug. No, she said. That's not possible. It is, I replied evenly. The deed was recorded this morning. Caroline snatched the papers from my father's hand and scanned them. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. This house? She said. This house is yours. I looked at her. Yes. My mother's voice sharpened instantly. Helen had no right. She had every right, I interrupted. She owned it. Silence. That was the sentence that cracked the room open. Not that I owned the house, that they never had. My father lowered himself back into his chair like gravity had changed. I paid for this house, he said hoarsely. You paid expenses, I replied. Maintenance. renovations, taxes, but title remained with the trust. Grandmother amended it before she died. Caroline stared at my father. You knew? No, he snapped too quickly. My mother looked from him to me to the documents, recalculating in real time. This is manipulative, she said. She did this to humiliate us. No, I said. You did that yourselves. Her mouth tightened. Caroline let out a strained, disbelieving laugh. You're not going to throw us out. I picked up my water glass, took one measured sip, and set it down. I didn't say that. My father finally looked at me directly. There was anger there, yes, but underneath it was something rarer. Fear. What do you want? The question landed harder than my mother's confession had, because it was honest. I looked around the dining room, at the portrait wall, at the polished silver, at the same table where I had spent years learning how quietly people can rank one another. Then I answered, I want accuracy. No one spoke. You wanted the truth out tonight, I continued. Fine. Here it is. You adopted me partly because there were financial benefits attached. You spent years acting like gratitude should make me forget that I noticed the difference. And this house, the one you've used as proof of authority, my entire adult life was never yours to leverage. My mother's eyes flashed. You were being unbelievably cold. I almost laughed. Forensic accounting teaches restraint. Caroline looked like she wanted to say something cutting, but couldn't find a safe angle. My father rubbed a hand over his face. What happens now? I reached back into the envelope and pulled out one final sheet. A letter from Martin Weiss outlining the transfer timeline and occupancy rights under Tennessee law. What happens now, I said calmly. It's nothing tonight. You stay here. I go home. Tomorrow, we meet with Martin Weiss at 10 a.m. and discuss formal occupancy terms. Occupancy terms, my mother repeated. Yes. You mean rent? I mean clarity. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, my mother had no prepared expression for me. No one touched the cake. The sparklers burned down into thin curls of smoke while the room sat frozen in a silence that felt heavier than shouting ever could. I slid the documents back into the envelope slowly, deliberately, as if this were simply another course in the meal and not a structural collapse of everything my parents thought they controlled. My mother was still standing, her fingers pressed flat against the table. Caroline stared at the papers like they might rearrange themselves if she refused to blink. My father looked older than he had an hour earlier. You're serious, he said finally. Yes, I answered. My voice did not tremble. That unsettled them more than anger would have. My mother lowered herself into her chair. This is vindictive, she said quietly. No, I replied. It's legal. Caroline leaned back, crossing her arms tightly. You're not going to throw us out. I held her gaze. I didn't say that. My father cleared his throat. What do you want? The question carried weight. For once, it wasn't rhetorical. I folded my hands on the table. Accuracy, I said. Transparency. Terms. My mother's lips tightened. Terms. We meet with Martin Weiss tomorrow at 10 a.m. We review occupancy structure. Nothing dramatic. Just clear. Caroline let out a sharp breath. Occupancy structure sounds like rent? It sounds like documentation, I answered. My father's eyes flicked to my face, searching for something softer. He didn't find it. 10 a.m., he said. 10 a.m., I repeated. I left without finishing dessert. The night air felt cool and steady against my face, and for the first time in years, I felt no pressure to soften what had just happened. My phone vibrated before I even reached the driveway. Caroline. I declined it. My mother followed. Then my father. I silenced the device and drove home without answering any of them. Power shifts don't require noise. They require restraint. At 9:58 the next morning, I walked into Martin Weiss's office. My parents were already seated. Caroline was beside them, jaw tight, posture rigid. Martin greeted me with a neutral nod and began outlining the recorded transfer. The deed was filed yesterday at 8:04. AM ownership is sole and enforceable, my mother interrupted. We know what it says. Martin did not adjust his tone. Occupancy rights remain undefined. That is today's purpose. He slid my drafted lease agreement across the polished table. My father read it first. 12-month renewable lease. Fair market rent. Below regional average. Maintenance responsibilities clearly split. No hidden clauses. No emotional language. Caroline scanned the document and looked up sharply. "You're charging your parents rent?" she demanded. "I'm formalizing occupancy," I replied. "We raised you," my mother snapped. "You adopted me," I corrected calmly. Silence fell again. My father set the paper down. "If we refuse?" he asked. "Under Tennessee law," Martin said evenly, 90 days notice would apply. Caroline's face flushed. "You would evict us?" "If necessary," I answered. I did not raise my voice. That made it worse for them. My mother stared at me, as if she were searching for the child she had once managed with a look. "You've changed," she whispered. "No," I said. "You're negotiating with me for the first time." My father picked up the pen. My mother inhaled sharply. "Thomas, this buys time," he muttered, signing his name. The scratch of ink sounded final. My mother hesitated longer, but eventually signed too. Caroline did not. Martin glanced at her gently. "You're not on title. Your signature isn't required." That realization hit her harder than anything else that morning. When the meeting ended, my parents left without looking back. Caroline lingered in the doorway. "This won't make you one of us," she said quietly. I met her eyes. It never did. She left. 3 weeks later, the first rent payment appeared in my account. I stared at the deposit notification longer than I expected. It wasn't about the money. It was about acknowledgement. Sunday dinners stopped after that. The silence felt different now. Less dismissive, more cautious. My mother called once, voice carefully neutral. "Is this how it's going to be?" "This is how it should have been," I said softly. Defined. Months passed. The house remained occupied. Payments arrived on schedule. Repairs were communicated in writing. Conversations became formal. My father began sending me maintenance updates as if I were a property manager rather than his daughter. In some ways, that honesty felt cleaner than years of subtle condescension. One evening, nearly 6 months after my birthday, I drove back to the house. Not invited, not announced. I parked in the driveway and stood beneath the dogwood trees in bloom. The shutters needed repainting. The mailbox leaned slightly. Details I had never been allowed to comment on before now felt like my responsibility. My father opened the door before I knocked. He looked tired, but steadier. "The HVAC unit needs servicing," he said without greeting. "I'll handle it," I replied. We stood there in the foyer in a silence that felt less hostile and more honest. After a moment, he spoke again. "We would have taken you in, regardless of the credits. I considered that carefully." "Maybe," I said. He met my eyes then. That part was real. "I know," I answered. Both truths could exist at once. They had taken me in, and they had benefited from it. Walking through the house felt surreal. The dining room still smelled faintly of polish and candles. The table where my mother had declared, "I was never one of them," stood exactly where it always had. I ran my fingers lightly along the back of the chair I had stood from that night. Ownership doesn't change memories. It changes perspective. For years, I had sat in that room trying to earn legitimacy. Now I understood something my grandmother had known long before I did. Belonging is not granted by volume or ceremony. It is secured by clarity, and sometimes the only way to correct a narrative built on convenience is to record the truth where it cannot be erased in contracts, in signatures, in ink. The first winter after the lease was signed came quietly. No dramatic arguments. No emotional confrontations. Just a slow, steady recalibration of roles that none of us had rehearsed for. Rent arrived on the first of every month. Maintenance requests came by email. My father addressed me formally in writing. "Ava, please advise on the gutter replacement estimate," attached, as if distance could soften the shift in authority. My mother stopped hosting large dinner parties. Caroline stopped bringing friends over. The house that had once felt like a performance stage now felt smaller, more contained. Ownership changes acoustics. Laughter echoes differently when it doesn't carry control. For the first few months, I didn't visit often. Not because I wanted to avoid them, but because I needed space to observe what would happen without me standing in the doorway as a symbol. When people lose assumed power, they either adjust or fracture. I wanted to see which direction my family would lean. In February, my father called late one evening. Not about maintenance, not about payment. The bank reached out, he said. His tone was measured but tight. They're reviewing long-term equity, structures tied to this property. I understood immediately. His financial planning had always treated the house as an asset on paper, even if title wasn't technically his. Now that the ownership was clear and recorded, that illusion had collapsed. They'll need updated documentation, I said. I'll send it. He exhaled slowly. It complicates things. It clarifies things, I replied. Silence followed. Not angry, just heavy. Caroline's shift was less subtle. She called me unexpectedly one afternoon and asked to meet for coffee. We hadn't been alone since the attorney's office. When she arrived, she didn't carry the same polished confidence she used to. I've been thinking, she began, stirring her drink without drinking it, about what you said that night. I waited. About not being one of us. She looked up at me. Did you really feel that way all these years? The question wasn't accusatory. It was confused. I considered my answer carefully. I felt tolerated, I said. Not included. She absorbed that slowly. I didn't notice, she admitted. That's the point, I replied gently. She looked down at her cup. I thought teasing meant closeness. Not when it's one-sided, I said. That conversation didn't fix anything, but it shifted something. Awareness is quieter than apology, but it lasts longer. Spring came, and with it, a letter from my grandmother's estate attorney regarding the final trust accounting. It confirmed something I had suspected but hadn't fully processed. My grandmother had intentionally withheld knowledge of the ownership structure from my parents for years. Not out of spite, but as protection. She had once written in the margins of her trust file, "Security does not belong in the hands of those who confuse generosity with leverage." I read that line 3 times. She hadn't just left me a house. She had left me insulation. In May, my mother invited me to lunch. Not at the house, at a small cafe halfway between our apartments. She arrived early and was already seated when I walked in. No dramatic posture, no curated expression, just a woman who looked tired. I've been angry, she admitted before I even sat down. At you, at Helen, at Thomas. I didn't interrupt, but I've also been embarrassed, she continued. Not because of the lease, because I didn't realize how much you had noticed. That sentence held more weight than she probably intended. Children notice everything, I said quietly. She nodded. I thought structure was enough. School, food, stability. Structure without warmth feels conditional, I replied. She flinched slightly, but she didn't argue. That was the first time we spoke without hierarchy, Lou. Over the summer, something unexpected happened. My father invited me to review long-term estate planning. Not for the house, but for everything else. Investments, business holdings, retirement accounts. If something happens to me, he said plainly, I don't want confusion. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement of competence. For years, he had treated my accounting career as dry and unremarkable. Now he was asking for my analysis. I reviewed the documents carefully and made recommendations without commentary about the past. Professional clarity replaced emotional negotiation. It wasn't warm, but it was respectful. Caroline's wedding plans shifted that same summer. The Aspen honeymoon became a smaller coastal trip. The extravagant guest list tightened. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. Then she told me quietly, it didn't feel right spending like that anymore. I didn't comment, but I noticed the shift in her tone. Less entitlement, more reflection. It felt less like eviction and more like evolution. On the last evening, before they moved out, we stood together in the empty living room. The walls echoed. The floors were bare. My father handed me a small box. "Found this in the attic," he said. Inside were childhood drawings I had made at 9 years old. Houses with uneven roofs and stick figures holding hands. On the back of one page, in my childish handwriting, I had written, "This is my home." My throat tightened unexpectedly. "You kept these?" I asked. "Yes," he said. Both truths had existed all along. They had taken me in, and they had calculated. They had failed me emotionally, and they had sheltered me physically. Complexity does not cancel consequence. When they drove away the next morning, the house felt enormous and silent, not heavy, just quiet. I walked through each room slowly, touching door frames, window sills, the staircase railing worn smooth from decades of hands. It no longer felt like a courtroom or a stage. It felt neutral. Belonging is not about who claims you. It is about what you refuse to let define you. I stood in the dining room one last time and looked at the table where my mother had said, "You were never really one of us." I understood now that she had been wrong in more ways than she realized. I didn't need to be one of them. I needed to be myself, with clarity, with documentation, with truth recorded where it could not be rewritten. And sometimes the strongest inheritance is not property, it's perspective. 6 months after my parents moved out, I finally started renovating the house. Not dramatically, just structural updates, electrical rewiring, floor reinforcement, basic inspection work. I wanted to keep most of it intact. It wasn't about erasing history. It was about stabilizing it. On the 3rd week of renovations, the contractor called me. "Miss Mercer, you might want to come down here." His tone wasn't casual. When I arrived, the living room floorboards near the old fireplace had been partially lifted. Beneath them was a small, sealed metal box bolted between 2 joists. It wasn't on any blueprint. It wasn't in any trust documentation. It had been intentionally hidden. The contractor stepped aside. "It's yours," he said. The lock wasn't rusted, which meant it hadn't been there for decades. It had been placed there later. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the surface. On the lid, scratched lightly into the metal, were 2 initials, HM, grandmother. I didn't open it immediately. I took it to Martin Weiss first. He examined it carefully and said something that made my stomach drop. This wasn't filed in any estate inventory, meaning this was never meant for probate. It was meant for me, privately. We opened it together. Inside were 3 items, a flash drive, a notarized document, and the second envelope with my name written in my grandmother's handwriting. I read the document first. It was a forensic audit of my father's finances, dated 12 years earlier. It detailed something I had never suspected. During a year after my biological father, his brother, died, Thomas had petitioned the court for control over the life insurance payout left in my name, not as guardian, as financial manager. He argued that I was too young for the funds to sit in trust and that early liquidation would better serve long-term stability. The court approved partial access. The audit showed where the money went. It didn't go to my education. It didn't go to long-term investments. It went into a failing commercial property venture that collapsed 3 years later. The amount? $487,000. Nearly the entire policy. My hands went cold. I opened the envelope next. "Ava, if you are reading this, then I was right not to trust silence. Thomas is not evil, but he is pragmatic to the point of cruelty when money is involved. When Daniel died, he convinced the court that he could manage your father's life insurance wisely. He did not. I confronted him when I found discrepancies in property filings tied to that investment. He admitted using part of your policy to stabilize a commercial acquisition that later failed. He intended to restore it quietly. He never did. I did not expose him publicly because it would have destroyed what remained of this family. Instead, I amended the trust. I ensured the house would transfer to you. I monitored the accounts closely. If he has told you this himself by now, then this letter is unnecessary. If he has not, you now hold the final truth. Correction is yours to decide. Helen. The room felt smaller. The tax break confession had been humiliating. This was different. This was theft. Legal. Structured. Sanitized. But theft. I picked up the flash drive. Martin inserted it into his computer. It contained scanned court filings, financial transfers, internal bank memos. Proof. Clean. Organized. Grandmother had prepared this like she knew one day I might need it. I sat back slowly. All this time, I thought the worst truth had already been revealed at my birthday dinner. It hadn't. My father hadn't just benefited from tax credits. He had used my father's death to leverage capital and lost it, then never replaced it. Martin looked at me carefully. "This is actionable," he said. Yes, it was. Nearly $500,000, with compounded interest over 12 years. The number in my head recalculated automatically. It was over $800,000 now. I drove to my parents' new townhouse that evening without calling. I placed the documents in front of him. He read the first page, then the second. His face drained slowly. My mother's hands began to shake. "You knew," I said quietly. He didn't deny it. "I intended to fix it," he said. "When?" Silence. When my father opened the door, he looked surprised but not uneasy. That changed when he saw my face. "We need to talk," I said. We sat at their small dining table, nothing like the old house. No silver, no staged portraits, just wood and overhead light. "It was a temporary liquidity crisis," he muttered. "You gambled my father's insurance." "It wasn't gambling. It failed." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. I thought I could multiply it with my money. He exhaled sharply. "I was trying to protect the family. You were protecting yourself." My mother started crying softly. Caroline stood frozen near the doorway. "I raised you," he said suddenly. "And you leveraged me," I replied. Silence. Then I said the words he had never expected to hear. "I'm filing a civil recovery claim." My mother gasped. Caroline stepped forward. "Ava, you don't mean that." "I do." My father's voice dropped. "You would destroy me?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm correcting you." The lawsuit was quiet. No press. No spectacle. The evidence was airtight. 3 months later, the settlement agreement was signed. He liquidated retirement holdings, sold a portion of his business interest, transferred assets, total recovery after legal fees, $823,417, transferred into a trust under my name. When the final wire confirmation hit my account, I didn't feel triumph. I felt balance. 2 weeks later, I did something none of them expected. I established a scholarship fund in my biological father's name for children who lost a parent and were placed with relatives. The initial endowment? $823,417. Every dollar recovered. At the dedication event, I invited my family. They came. My father stood in the back, not as host, not as authority, just present. When I stepped to the podium, I said one sentence that ended everything. Belonging should never come with interest. My father lowered his eyes. My mother cried openly. Caroline didn't look amused anymore, and in that moment, I understood something completely. The house had been correction. The lease had been recalibration. The lawsuit had been closure. But this was inheritance reclaimed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel adopted. I felt rooted.